First, we mount the standoffs. The standoffs are used to mount the motherboard to the case. The power supply powers the whole system, and depending on your needs, there are different form factors for power supplies. The most common of them are full 8X and SFX. This one seems to be a full 8X power supply. An I/O shield needs to be put before the motherboard because you won't be able to put it in afterwards, though some motherboards have built-in I/O shields. I/O shields are important because it protects the motherboard from your mistakes in missing the I/O and hitting the motherboard, as well as preventing dust or any debris from getting in your case. The motherboard is where everything connects to. If you had to compare it to something, it would probably be your spine. Now we have the CPU, but before you place it in, you should pull the retention bracket up. Then place the CPU in. If this were a real PC, we would have to align the CPU's golden triangle to the motherboard's golden triangle. Also, in real life, you do not press against the CPU. You just slide it in and do not at all costs touch the golden pins at the back. Depending on which CPU brand you're using, the pins would be on the CPU for an AMD Ryzen chip, or the pins would be on the motherboard for an Intel chip. On Intel CPUs, it is generally more likely to bend the pins on the motherboard with enough force, hence the retention bracket. Once the CPU's been put in, you pull the retention arm down. Since CPUs produce heat, they need some cooling. We use a rice grain sized amount of thermal paste. Thermal paste is used to fill in the air gaps between the heatsink and the CPU. If you left the air gaps between the CPU and the cooler, the best thermal performance of the CPU cooler would never be achieved, and the CPU might thermal throttle, which would not allow it to fully utilize its performance, and the CPU's life will be shortened. There are also other thermal interfaces that can be used. There are thermal pads. There's also thermal epoxy. Then we have liquid metal. Now we have the CPU cooler. Note that this is a stock Intel cooler. This cooler is an air cooler. There are other coolers like an all-in-one liquid cooler or an AIO and a custom water loop. Next, we place the graphics card. As you can see, it is a GTX 680. A GPU or graphics processing unit does the video processing. Next, we place the RAM modules into their slots by opening each slot. RAM or random access memory is a fast temporary place where data is stored, and we do have 4 RAM modules. But if we only had 2 RAM modules, you would slot them into the second closest to the CPU RAM slot and the farthest away RAM slot. If you only had 1 RAM module, put it in the second RAM slot. You can just use 1 hard drive, but having only one will not have any form of parity or protection, so your data will not be protected and in the event of hard drive failure, there will be major data loss. After that, we place the fans in the case. There are 2 standard sizes for fans, 120mm and 140mm. Remember to make sure your fan's form factor fits the case, since cases may only work with 120mm. But the majority of 140mm fan compatible cases will also work with a 120mm fan.